Es ist 17:09 Uhr Utah Time. Hallo in alle Himmelsrichtungen. Im Namen des Utah Office of Tourism Deutschland, Österreich und Schweiz heiße ich Sie herzlich willkommen zu unserem Virtual Media Event. Wir hoffen, alle sind entspannt in die ersten Wochen des neuen Jahres gestartet. Mein Name ist Claudia Seidel und ich betreue hier von Hannover aus für den Beehive State die Bereiche Öffentlichkeitsarbeit und Social Media. Im Fokus der nächsten Stunde steht der 45. US-Bundesstaat Utah mit dem renommierten und von Robert Redford gegründeten Sundance Film Festival. Da es jedes Jahr Ende Januar stattfindet, ist es ein perfektes Highlight während eines Urlaubs in Winter Wonderland, Utah, mit seinen 15 Skigebieten und dem Greatest Snow on Earth, der wissenschaftlich nachgewiesen ist. Außerdem reisen Sie mit unseren beiden Key-Speakern durch die sensationelle Filmgeschichte Utahs. Wir wetten, auch Sie werden danach überzeugt sein. Utah gilt zu Recht als Americas Filmset. Aber ich möchte nicht zu viel verraten, denn das übernehmen unsere beiden Kenner und Insider, die heute live zugeschaltet sind. Kurz noch ein paar Infos zum Ablauf. Fragen können Sie in unsere Chatbox stellen, auf die wir gegen Ende eingehen werden. Und zeitnah, wir planen morgen am Freitag, erhalten alle per E-Mail noch ein Follow-up inklusive Recording und PDF. So, now we are switching into English. Lean back and make yourself comfortable and enjoy some Utah from home film feeling wherever you are. And before we start, we would like to introduce our valued insider speakers today. Welcome live from Utah, Virginia Pearce from the Utah Film Commission and John Nein from the Sundance Institute. Hello, Virginia and John. How are you? And how's Utah a week prior to the Sundance Film Festival 2022?
Hello. Thanks so much for having us. I am in Utah and we are getting ready, even though it will be virtual this year, we're still getting ready and excited about having all of the films being shown. And I know John's going to talk a little more about that.
Wow, sounds fantastic. Okay, Virginia, the spotlight is yours and Utah's iconic history.
Okay, well, thanks so much again. And I think we'll just dive into our presentation. As Claudia said, I'm the director of the Utah Film Commission, and we are a state agency that helps support film production in Utah by promoting our locations, our vendors, and our crew, and just helping films get their films made here. So we can go ahead and start the presentation. We're going to start off with a little piece to illustrate. So as you can see, Utah has been the backdrop for thousands of films since the beginning of the industry in the 20s. And our landscapes are still playing a big part of films today. The love affair really started with director John Ford. John Ford was looking to film a Western on location in 1935, and that really wasn't done at the time. Most movies were shot on a Hollywood soundstage. But he saw photos of Monument Valley in southern Utah, which is the picture you see on your screen, and found landscape, which became the backdrop of his 1939 classic Stagecoach. And this film was a huge success and led the way for 4 more John Ford and John Wayne movies shot in Utah. You can see the posters up on your screen as well. And the success of these films really showed that Westerns could be great entertainment and profitable. And between 1930 and 1970s, literally hundreds of Westerns were made in southern Utah, from Cedar City to Moab to Monument Valley. And it really opened up all of Utah's locations to Hollywood. If you want to go to the next slide, you can see some of the locations that, have both been a backdrop of films and have become great tourist attractions. We're going to talk a little bit more later in the presentation, but it's to test the gorgeous location that inspire storytellers for almost 100 years. So next slide. In 1968, all of these Westerns had, opened the door for a more modern take on a Western, and actor Robert Redford was already living in Provo Canyon in Utah. He had just finished his role in Barefoot in the Park and was approached by the director George Roy Hill to play the supporting actor to Paul Newman in a film that they were going to call The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy. And actually, I'm going to let you hear this story from the source. So you can play the next clip.
So the initial title was Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy, and then I was put up for Butch Cassidy because I'd done a comedy on Broadway, so therefore I was the funny guy, So I had a meeting with George Roy Hill, and I said, well, we met in a bar on 3rd Avenue in New York, and I said, look, I'm interested in this. Yeah, I think it's a great story, but that's not the part I'm interested in. And he was intrigued by that, and he said, what? And I said, I can more relate to the Sundance Kid, because he's an outlaw, and I can more relate to that sensibility than I can. Also, I'm not a happy-go-lucky guy. I can do it because I've done comedy, but that's not what really interests me. He got very taken with that idea. So he went to Paul, and because he knew Paul, and that the real Paul was just exactly that finger-snapping guy that was always smoking, and he had tape on his fingers because he was always biting his nail, because he's a nervous guy. But his image on film was this cool guy. So he went to Paul and he said, I want you to meet Redford, because I think you should play Butch Cassidy. So I went, in New York, I went to meet Paul, and we had a dinner. And in the course of that dinner, he and I got to know each other. And when he came out of me, he said, I think I should play Butch Cassidy. That Bob played the Sundance Kid.
Listen, I don't mean to be a sore loser, but when it's done, if I'm dead, kill him. Love to.
That never gets old, seeing those two. Hopefully it hasn't been too long since you've seen Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. If you haven't, you need to watch it. But so once they had settled who was going to play what, Redford, who was living in Utah and loved the locations, convinced the director to come look at southern Utah for the film. And of course, the film was a huge success. It came out in 1969 and became the highest Western film of that time. Of course, this launched 2 things that have become synonymous for Utah: Sundance Resort and Sundance Film Festival. In 1980, Redford founded Sundance Institute and started the Artist Labs at Sundance Resort, which continue today as a way to help emerging filmmakers develop their projects. And in 1991, Sundance took over a small existing film festival in Utah, and it became the Sundance Film Festival. So we're going to watch one more little clip. You can go to the next slide.
I wanted to have a sense of place. I wanted to have a sense of home. I wanted to be able to do projects that were unorthodox, which led to the beginning of the Institute. When the Institute started in 1980, suddenly I was putting together two things, place and a community. That's how this thing started. They want to see films they don't think they can see in the marketplace. And I underestimated that. So suddenly I realized that what we really had, what we had developed, was a two-way street of opportunity. And that leads to where we are now.
That makes me miss the festival in person. Hopefully by next year, we'll all be back in Park City. But it's been so fun to watch the Institute and the festival grow in our backyard. And we've been lucky to have over 40 films with Utah ties that have premiered at the festival. These posters are just a few of films that have shot in Utah and premiered. And we have one this year called Summering. You can see at the bottom right. We don't have an official poster for them yet, because they are just premiering next week, but we're excited to see that one. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to John.
Thank you, Virginia. I'm John Nein. I am a senior programmer at Sundance. I have been doing this for about 20 years, and I thought I would take about 10 minutes to talk to you a little bit more about the festival and how it's changed over the years and where we see it fitting into the festival landscape around the world. I think, first and foremost, Sundance was founded as an institute for independent artists, and that's really core to our identity and also to the way that we see the festival. Now, what independent means in the US is complicated, as it is everywhere, but we tend to associate it with a few things. We say that independence puts an emphasis on personal sensibility and distinctive voices, telling stories that aren't being told. So if you really want to see what America looks like, you turn, I think, largely to American independent work, fiction and documentary, because these are the stories that often aren't being told within the system. And that's why the history of American independent cinema is so tied to the history of emerging cinemas like African-American cinema, Latinx cinema, gay lesbian cinema, Asian American, and also regional cinema as well, movies not made in New York and Los Angeles, because these were the stories that weren't being told, especially in the 80s and 90s as American independent cinema emerged. And we also think about independence meaning outside the studio system, outside of the market-driven mechanisms of the American film industry, as Redford was saying in that clip. It's not unusual to hear studio executives walking around Sundance talking about all the films that they passed on at the script stage, only to now be buying at the festival. And that's, I think, a way in which Sundance has always been ahead of the curve in terms of what kinds of cinema is made, inventive cinema, boundary pushing cinema. For example, the system was never going to make Reservoir Dogs. But then once it was successful, the system tried to imitate it for years, maybe even decades. We'll move to the next slide. So as a result, Sundance has always been considered the discovery festival. And I think that's baked into our history and our mythology. It's one of the reasons that there's this incredible energy and excitement in Park City as you move into the festival, is that you go there expecting that you're going to discover something that you haven't seen before, new films, new filmmakers. And that's maybe the biggest difference between Sundance and other major festivals, is that our competitions are all about discovery. We don't show established filmmakers, master filmmakers in our competitions. We show future filmmakers. And so over the years, that's become a very long list of American filmmakers who began their careers by showing work at Sundance, sometimes a first feature, sometimes even a short film. We'll move to the next slide. And you'll see this early generation of filmmakers like Todd Haynes, Joel and Ethan Coen, Steven Soderbergh, Allison Anders, P.T. Anderson, Wes Anderson, Nicole Holofcener, Greg Araki, famous newly, Quentin Tarantino, David O. Russell, all of these people, who were sort of associated with the early part of American independent film history. Now, you would occasionally see an international director there. I love this picture of Guillermo del Toro on a panel the year that Kronos played. But the difference at that time was that those international films were probably not premiering at Sundance. They would have played at other festivals at that time. And then if we move to the next slide, you see that that early generation turns into a new generation and a new generation and a new generation of emerging filmmakers, people like Ryan Coogler, Miranda July, Chloe Zhao, Ava DuVernay, Damien Chazelle, Ryan Johnson. This is a very, very long list. You move to the next slide. Every time we try to make a list, it's just really long and we forget people. And it's a lot of people who have, sort of come out of Sundance and seen their career opportunities and their ability to make work grow. And that's what's exciting to us. So the idea that new talent breaks at Sundance means that industry is not just coming to buy films, they're coming to scout talent. And you get agents and managers, producers, companies who are looking for new filmmaking talent. So the discovery of American filmmakers is kind of so core to our mythology, and it's a very strong mythology, that it sometimes overwhelms what we think has happened more recently, and that's that we've become a place for international discovery as well, too. International has always been a part of the festival. Even in the early days, we would have been playing films that were part of the specialty market in the US in the 90s. So you'd see films like from Jean Yimou, Giuseppe Tornatore, John Woo. In fact, in 1985, the first year that Sundance ran the festival, you would have seen films from Wim Wenders and Werner Herzog. And then over the next 20 years, you see a lot of international films play at Sundance, big titles that were part of the festival circuit, but again, they would not have necessarily premiered at Sundance. But all that changed in 2005 when we started our world cinema competitions, both in fiction and documentary. And that's when we started focusing on the idea of emerging international talent, just as we had been focusing on the idea of emerging American talent. And if you move to the next slide, please, you'll see that idea of a discovery section for international filmmakers is really core now to who we are. It's a section that I think has only really started to hit its stride, but we're really proud of some of the exceptional films and filmmakers who have launched at Sundance, filmmakers like Taika Waititi, Jennifer Kent, Sebastian Silva, Sophie Hyde, Claudia Lauja, Muli Surya. And you see films like Monos, Animal Kingdom, Cuties, Guilty, premiering at Sundance and really sort of launching careers. And a lot of those films end up being, the submissions for the Oscars. They end up being released in the US in what is still a challenging market for international film, but one that is certainly helped by premiering at Sundance. And so unlike the early years, when we were showing work from other festivals, we're now largely premiering work and launching films, including films by more established filmmakers. So if you move to the next slide, please, you see that we're premiering films like The Souvenir, Call Me By Your Name, Motorcycle Diaries, and it's a really core part of the festival now, and I think that's a major change the last 20 years. And it's also this idea of opportunity for international talent to work in the US industry. I remember we showed a film from Armando Bo called The Last Elvis. It was sold, it had a modest release in the US, but he was signed by US agents. He began to work in the US industry. And he went on to win an Oscar as one of the writers of Birdman. And I think that's one of the things that we see as core to the festival as well, too, which is creating opportunity for filmmakers. That was true of talent, Carla Yuri Wetlands. She turned a lot of heads, and a lot of talent agents fighting to sign her, and she's went on to do a lot of interesting work internationally. So I wanted to kind of tie it into some of the German, Austrian, and Swiss artists who we've had, even from the beginning. Filmmakers like Philipp Gröning have brought work to Sundance. We have had Swiss artist Piplotti Rist, documentary filmmakers who have come out of our documentary competition like Alexander O'Philippe. And I remembered that in the earliest competition, the first competition we had in 2005, we showed Forest for the Trees, Maren Ade's debut feature, although it had already played Toronto, but did quite well at Sundance. And we've had a number of other artists, Veit Helmer, Dennis Gansel, Nicolette Krebitz, David Wendt, Ronny Trocker, and one of my favorites, My Happy Family, which is actually a German, Georgian co-production, but a lovely film that we played a few years ago. The next slide, I wanted to give you just like a quick sense of what Sundance is like as a festival. It is a cold place that people go to watch movies. And I think that's actually part of the magic, right? Is that you have to choose to go there and you have to want to go there. We try to keep a sort of, I don't know, an emphasis on the filmmakers. We have a brunch every year that is up in the mountains in Provo Canyon that Redford invites the filmmakers to, and it's a really lovely moment where he can talk about the origins of Sundance. We have a lot of music. These are the singers from 20 Feet from Stardom. I remember seeing Sting play to what must have been like 80 people in a small room. It's kind of got this feeling of intimacy. We do a lot of panel discussions and a way of interacting with the artists in the festival for the audience. And I think most importantly, we don't stand on formality. We're not ceremonial in the way that some other festivals are. I love this photo down in the center bottom. This is the director of the festival at the time, John Cooper, making pancakes for the filmmakers. That's something that all the programmers do towards the end of the festival. We make breakfast for the filmmakers. And I think that's part of what the vibe of Sundance is. We're not a formal market the way that other festivals are. And yet at the same time, an incredible amount of business is transacted. And I think often that is considered to be the big films that grab the headlines for being major sales, but it's actually the small films too. When you break down what happens in terms of sales globally, even for international films, you actually find that a fair amount of business is done, and it's a really significant informal market. And it has an interesting connection to Berlinale in the sense that most of these films will go on to sell to other territories through the European film market in Berlin. And that's part of a sort of tandem that I think is really effective in terms of the industry. If we go to the next slide, please. I just wanted to say a brief word about this program and this year's program, which we'll start in a week, and we're very excited about it. It's 85 features from 28 countries. We, as always, are incredibly proud of the diversity in this program. 52% of the films include a woman director. 35% of the films include a filmmaker of color. It's impossible to go through the entire program and point out highlights. I think we saw a lot of interesting things this year. We saw films about grief and loss. We saw films, really interesting way of bending genre storytelling in order to dissect race and privilege in the US. We saw some incredible creativity within the documentary format. I think of a film, Fire of Love, which is about French volcano scientists, or Riotsville, USA, which uses archival footage from the US Army's training for civil unrest in a kind of really interesting way. And there will no doubt be the hot titles, which will be major sales at the festival. I think some of those we'll be reading headlines about shortly. And then there are short works. There are works that we play in New Frontier, which is immersive storytelling, VR, AR. I wanted to point out a couple of films of the German language works. If we could move to the next slide, we have 2 short films. One is called Zune, which makes me smile every time I see it. I think it's 5 minutes, and it's just like, it's so much fun to watch. Cosmogony, which is live dance performance propelled into a virtual space using motion capture technology. It's incredible work. Another animated short called Sweet Nothing. So there's a lot of really interesting short work as well too. I think we're playing somewhere around 60 shorts this year. And lastly, since we're talking about German language short films, I thought I would share one of my favorite stories, one of my favorite Sundance stories. It's such a classic moment in Sundance history, and it involves a German filmmaker, Veit Helmer, in a small but crucial role. If we move to the next slide, this is the story of how the print of Nicole Holofcener's Walking and Talking got to Sundance. And I cannot do this story justice in 30 seconds, but this was back in 1996, when filmmakers would actually come to the festival carrying their print, usually. So Nicole and her producers, Ted Hope and James Shamus, are carrying their print, still wet from having come out of the lab. They're flying out of New York, where there's a huge storm coming in. Their flight barely gets out, but it hits a bird and shatters the cockpit window. So they have to go back to New York. By that time, the storm has moved in and all the flights are canceled. But clever producers that they are, Ted and James hire a small 10-seat airplane to fly them out of New York. It's the only plane that'll fly. They make it to Park City. They land in the storm and they're racing to the theater to platter the print and get the movie. Everybody's waiting. The audience has been there. Now, sometimes we play short films in front of features, and the short before this was a lovely, creative, inventive short called Surprise by Veit Helmer. They had played the short, but in order to stall for more time while the print was getting there, they asked Veit to do a Q&A for the film, which he did. And he just kept going and kept going. He would think that it was over and they would wave to him and say, no, keep going, keep going. So this went on for about 45 minutes. And because Veit is actually very, very funny, it almost became a stand-up comedy act that goes until the moment when the print is ready and finally the movie starts. It sells the next morning. The rest is history. Nicole Holofcener has a wonderful career, but it's all because the audience was kept entertained by Veit Helmer telling stories about making the film. I thought of this not only because it's a funny story about a German short filmmaker, but also because I think it's a perfect example of the spirit of independence that we were talking about at the very beginning, and this idea of what is independent cinema. Getting the print of this film to the festival, I think it encapsulates that spirit. So a fun story to, oh, I forgot the last slide, which is Veit, actually. If we could move to the next slide, that's Veit. We sort of thought this was such a great story. We did a little piece about it a few years ago. So anyway, with that, I will throw it back to Virginia, Claudia, whoever is next.
Wow, John and Virginia, that's so impressive. Thank you so much for sharing the stories with us. And yeah, we move on. Well, follow us on a virtual journey to some of Utah's most iconic silver screen backdrops. In 2019, the Hamburg-based film enthusiast Andrea David, with her profile Film Tourismus, visited the Beehive State's famous movie locations and scenes. Utah's unique landscape, from its salt desert to the mountain peaks of the Rockies to red rocks of all shapes, has made the state a popular backdrop for filmmakers since the era of Hollywood's beloved westerns. On screen, Utah has slipped into countless roles, sometimes as different states or even different planets. Here we are presenting some of them, and maybe you'll be surprised. Firstly, do you remember the dramatic film scene when Forrest Gump, aka Tom Hanks, stopped his work after 3 years, 2 months, 14 days and 16 hours with the words, "I'm pretty tired. I think I go home now"? Exactly. This scene was shot on Highway 163 with the breathtaking Monument Valley at the horizon at mile marker 13, which is also named Forrest Gump Point. In the third image, you see a stinking alien and Captain Stephen Hiller, aka Will Smith, alone in the salt desert. The blockbuster Independence Day was filmed in Utah's West Desert in the Bonneville Salt Flats. Moreover, in the first image, you can see the movie Thelma and Louise at Arches National Park. In 2021, the legendary road movie celebrated its 30th anniversary. Incredible, isn't it? In addition, there's Con Air with Nicolas Cage, which was filmed at Wendover Airfield. The airfield is situated between the Bonneville Salt Flats and to the border to Nevada. We also would like to highlight the film Gravity in the third image with Sandra Bullock at Lake Powell in southern Utah, and of course, Jeremiah Johnson with Robert Redford at the Stewart Falls near Mount Timpanogos, which you can see in the third image. So if you are interested to dive deeper into the great range of blockbusters and productions which were filmed in Utah scenery, you're very welcome to read the blog article of Andrea. Please see the given link at the bottom. And now we would like to bring some releases of films which were produced in Utah and next anniversary to your attention. First, the second image, 9 Days, is a 2020 American supernatural drama about a man who interviews 5 unborn souls to determine which one can be given life on Earth. The film had its world premiere at the Sundance Film Festival 2020 and was released in the US in July last year. Filmed in various Utah locations, including Salt Lake City and the surrounding area, the main destinations for shooting the production occurred in the Knolls Recreation Area and the nearby Bonneville Salt Flats. Also in July last year, the American biographical drama Joe Bell, in the third image, was released in the US. The film stars Mark Wahlberg with filming in Salt Lake City and follows the true story of a father and his gay son who was bullied in school. And in regards to anniversaries this year, we would like to point out 50 years of Jeremiah Johnson, with Robert Redford as a Mexican-American war veteran who takes up the life of a mountain man, supporting himself in the Rocky Mountains as a trapper. Ultimately, it was shot in nearly 100 locations across Utah, including Mount Timpanogos, the Ashley National Forest, Snow Canyon State Park, St. George, Sundance Resort, and Zion National Park, and many, many more. Well, now it's time for our Q&A. Let's have a look in our chat box. Well, Virginia and John, so what's your favorite movie or production in the lineup of this year?
I know John loves that question. I'll let him take it.
You know, of course, I'm not allowed to have favorites, but I certainly would. I mentioned one, the documentary Fire of Love, which is about 2 volcanologists, French volcanologists. I think it's such a lovely, fresh documentary. There are some films. I really love the film Master in the American competition. It's one of the films I was referring to as kind of, in this vein of Black horror and of reframing genre to talk about race. I think it's a really strong film. Yeah, I don't know. There's so many. I think it just really depends on what kinds of films you like. There's a film in our international competition, which is an Australian Macedonian film called You Won't Be Alone, which I think also is just an amazing first feature. some really, some bigger films as well too. So there's just a lot of great films.
Oh, wow, sounds fantastic. So is there already a date of the next year film festival announced?
That's probably a question I should know the answer to, but don't. We are very typically in the third week of January. So we usually start around the 18th, 20th, 21st of January. I actually don't know if we've.
I think it'll be the
announced it.
19th through the 29th.
Thank you, Virginia.
Yeah, so close, similar to this year. All right, so Virginia, do you have a special personal memory you would like to share with us, because you were working for the Sundance Institute as well for over 20 years? So do you have a special memory? You always have fun and smiling.
So many memories. I've known John Nein for a really long time. We kind of grew up at the festival together, and just the stories about the prints. When I first started, all the films were shot on 35 or 16, and everything came in on a print, and everything was coming in, and had to be loaded onto the giant reels. We had print runner volunteers that would get the prints from place to place. And one of my jobs was to schedule all of that and make sure that we had enough time to get prints from one place to another. And there are so many crazy stories about against all odds films making it through the snow to get to play in front of an audience. So it just is fun to see how much Sundance has changed, how much filmmaking has changed. I love to see all the diversity that we're seeing now, and stories, as John said, from far-flung places and from regional places like Utah, where you can get filmmakers to tell their stories in a really unique way. And I love that Sundance still champions that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we can imagine. All right, so no more questions. And okay, let's move on to the next. Virginia would like to give you some information about the special festival access.
Yeah, so we do have a limited amount of the Explorer Pass for this year's festival. This gives you online access to all of the New Frontier, indie episodic, and short film programs for the festival. And it's available for the whole 10 days. If you'd like to take advantage of this offer, please email the email you see on your screen. And also, Claudia, I think you're going to send some information around, correct?
Correct.
We
tomorrow.
do need to know that pretty quickly so that we can get that access email out to you. So let us know. There are so many great shorts. I have been sneaking early access to some of the short films, and I'm already loving what I'm seeing. So it's a great way to get to again see some future filmmakers. So many have gotten their start in the short program.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, as mentioned, we will follow up tomorrow with all information on the recording and PDF, and again with information on the festival access. So you can email Christina or Virginia. All right, lastly, we have some information on resources. About the film festival, the Sundance Institute, and some great stories of Robert Redford, visit utah.com website, and of course our B2B newsroom. So if you need any assistance regarding press information, images for the film festival, so please email us or just have a look on our B2B newsroom. Yeah, unfortunately, we are close to the end, and with the backdrop of Salt Lake City and the Rocky Mountains in Winter Wonderland, Utah, we would like to say goodbye and thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed our event. As mentioned, tomorrow you will receive a follow-up. And please, as always, reach out to us if you have any questions regarding Utah, Sundance Film Festival, or the Utah Film Commission. Moreover, a big, big thank you and a hug for to Virginia and John, yeah, for sharing your amazing knowledge and for writing such interesting insider information. So have a great rest of the week and stay safe, stay creative, and yeah, hope to see you soon again in one of our next webinars. Goodbye from Germany, and yeah, goodbye to Utah.
Thanks so much.